The gravel crunched under the tires of my battered pickup truck as I pulled into the overgrown driveway of the Blackwood Ranch. For 20 years, I had worked as a structural engineer in the city, surrounded by steel, glass, and the relentless hum of progress. But when my grandfather passed away and left me this crumbling relic on the edge of Mirror Lake, I felt a pull I couldn't ignore. The ranch house was a skeleton of its former glory. Built in 1926, the cedar siding was gray and brittle, the wraparound porch sagged like a tired smile, and the roof leaked every time a cloud dared to pass over the valley. To most, it was a teardown. To me, it was the only place that ever felt like home. I spent the first month just clearing the brush. The brambles had grown so thick they choked the life out of the old oaks, and the path to the private dock had vanished under a carpet of invasive weeds. It was during that first month that I met the president. I was sweat-soaked and covered in sawdust when a pristine white golf cart hummed to a halt at the edge of my property line. Out stepped a woman who looked like she had been vacuum-sealed in expensive athleisure wear. Her hair was a helmet of blonde highlights, and she held a clipboard like a shield. "You must be Elias," she said, her voice a sharp contrast to the peaceful chirping of the crickets. She didn't offer a hand. "I'm Margaret Vance, president of the Mirror Lake Homeowners Association. We've been waiting for someone to do something about this eyesore. However, I noticed you've been removing the native shrubbery. I hope you have the approved landscaping permits from the board." I wiped my brow and leaned on my shovel. "Actually, Margaret, this property was grandfathered in long before the HOA was formed. My deed says I have autonomy over the lakeside acreage." Her eyes narrowed, a thin line forming where her lips used to be. "We'll see about that. This community has standards. We wouldn't want a restoration to turn into a junkyard. My son Tyler has always had his eye on this plot. He says it's the crown jewel of the lake. It's a shame it's in such capable hands." The way she said capable felt like a slur. From that moment, I knew I wasn't just fighting dry rot and termites, I was fighting Margaret Vance. The restoration became my life's work. I didn't want to modernize the ranch, I wanted to heal it. I sourced reclaimed heart pine for the flooring and spent weeks hand-sanding the original banisters. Every nail I hammered felt like a conversation with my grandfather. By the 6-month mark, the house was starting to breathe again. The sage-green paint blended perfectly with the pines, and the new copper gutters caught the sunlight in the evenings. But as the house grew more beautiful, Margaret grew more hostile. She sent inspectors nearly every week. I was cited for the color of my mailbox, the length of my grass, and even the noise pollution of my table saw. Then the narrative changed. Margaret began telling the neighbors that I had swindled the property away. At the local hardware store, I overheard her telling a group of retirees that the ranch was supposed to be sold to her son, Tyler, and that I had used legal loopholes to steal a young man's dream. The tension peaked on a sweltering July afternoon. I had just finished installing the final piece of the restored stained glass window in the foyer when I heard the screech of tires. It wasn't a golf cart this time, it was a luxury SUV. Margaret stormed out, followed by a man in his late 20s who looked like he'd never done a day of manual labor in his life. This was Tyler. He looked at the ranch with a mixture of greed and resentment. "I've had enough of this, Elias," Margaret screamed, her face turning a vibrant shade of magenta. "I've looked at the old records. This property was promised to the community for a clubhouse extension years ago. You're trespassing on what should be my son's heritage. You've restored a building that isn't even yours to keep." I walked down the porch steps, wiping my hands on a rag. "Margaret, the deed is in my name. It's been in my family for a century. There was never a promise to the HOA." "You stole it," she shrieked, her voice echoing across the water. "You saw a grieving family and you moved in like a vulture. Tyler was supposed to build his estate here. You're just a glorified handyman playing house in a ruin." Tyler stepped forward, trying to look intimidating. "Look, man, name your price. We can end this today. My mom is right. This place belongs to someone who actually fits the neighborhood. You're an outsider." I looked at Tyler, then back at the house. I thought about the hours I spent in the crawl space, the scars on my knuckles, and the way the sunset hit the lake from the master bedroom. "It's not for sale, Tyler, and it never was. Your mother is chasing a ghost." The next few weeks were a legal blitz. Margaret filed an injunction, claiming the property lines were drawn incorrectly in 1924. She tried to have the ranch declared a historical hazard. She even organized a beautification protest at my gate. It was exhausting. I found myself sitting on the porch at night, wondering if the peace I was seeking was even possible with a neighbor who viewed my existence as a personal insult. The climax came during the annual Mirror Lake Founders' Day Gala. Since my property was the oldest on the lake, the town council, not the HOA, had asked if they could host the historical presentation on my lawn. I agreed, mostly to see the look on Margaret's face. The evening was beautiful. Lanterns hung from the old oaks, and the ranch house glowed like a warm amber beacon against the dark water. Half the town was there. Margaret arrived in a shimmering dress, looking like she was ready to accept an award for a building she spent months trying to destroy. She spent the first hour whispering in people's ears, pointing at the house and shaking her head. Finally, the town historian, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, took the podium. "Tonight we celebrate the heart of Mirror Lake," he began, "and we are standing on its very foundation. For years there have been rumors about the fate of the Blackwood Ranch. Some thought it would be leveled for condos, others claimed it belonged to the development board." He paused, looking directly at Margaret. "But we are lucky that a true descendant returned to save it." Margaret stood up, interrupting him. "Mr. Henderson, I think it's important to address the legality of this restoration. My son Tyler has the original development maps from 1985 that show this land as public access property. This man is sitting on stolen assets." The crowd went silent. I felt a pit in my stomach, but Mr. Henderson just smiled sadly and pulled a heavy, leather-bound book from his bag. "Actually, Margaret, I'm glad you brought that up, because I have the 1926 land registry right here. And I also have a letter from the founder of this town, your late father-in-law." Margaret froze, the color drained from her face. Mr. Henderson opened the book. "In 1926, the Blackwood family gave the town the land for the park and the school. In exchange, they were granted the Lake Ranch in perpetuity. Your father-in-law wrote a letter in 1982, I have it here, stating that the HOA he was forming would have no claim over the Blackwood estate because, and I quote, 'The Blackwoods are the soul of this lake, and without their stewardship, we are just a collection of fences.'" He looked at the crowd. Elias didn't steal this property, he saved it, and he did so while being harassed by the very organization meant to protect our community. A murmur went through the crowd. People who had been listening to Margaret's poison for months suddenly looked at her with new eyes. Tyler looked down at his shoes, clearly embarrassed. Margaret tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no words came out. She had built a mountain of lies to try and secure a lakeside view for her son, and it had crumbled under the weight of a century-old truth. As the gala ended and the guests filtered out, the silence of the lake returned. I stood on the dock, watching the ripples of the water. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Tyler. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "She told me the ranch was ours by right. She told me you were a squatter who found a loophole." "We all believe what we want to believe, Tyler," I said, "but this house doesn't belong to a name or a deed. It belongs to the lake. I'm just the guy making sure it stays standing." He nodded, looked at the house one last time, and walked away. I never saw Margaret Vance again after that night. She resigned from the HOA and moved to a gated community 2 towns over where, I assume, the grass is always exactly 2.5 inches tall. I stayed, I finished the work. I repaired the old boathouse and replanted the wildflowers that Margaret called weeds. Every morning I wake up to the sound of the water lapping against the shore, and every evening the house feels a little more alive. The 100-year-old ranch isn't just a building anymore, it's a testament. It's a reminder that while some people try to build walls and claim what isn't theirs, there is a deeper power in restoring what was lost and honoring the roots that hold us all in place. I didn't steal a property, I reclaimed a legacy. And as I sit on my porch, watching the moon reflect in Mirror Lake, I know that for the first time in 100 years, the ranch is finally at peace.